We will be distributing now the simultaneous translation headsets. The talk of Francois Jullien will be in French. For those of you who want to listen to it in French, you don't need the headsets. For those of you who want to have English translation, the headsets are distributed on both sides. It is indeed our dream come true that Francois Jullien is here today. His book, Silent Transformation, has been an inspiration for years. It has inspired many, many artists, from Huang Yangping to Kushonga, actually to architects, to designers, and has been a very big inspiration for this year's marathon. Francois is professor at the Université Paris 7, Denis Diderot, and director at the Institut de la Pensée Contemporaine. He is the author, besides the book Silent Transformations, which you can find in English, published by Seagull, also of other books translated into English on the universal, the uniform, the common, and dialogue between cultures, as well as the Book of Beginnings. His books are very, very widely read, of course, in many languages. And in a way, we spoke with Francois Jullien in Paris a couple of weeks ago, preparing this transformation marathon, and he told us very important is the distinction somehow between the physiological and the psychic in relation to the theme, and how actually a questioning of these faculties can lead to a radical transformation. I would like to quote him here from this conversation. "It is a beautiful question. What is language inside me? What do I need to whip in order to continue to move forward? That hints at an idea that is essential. The problem of life cannot be formulated in terms of meaning. What I must do is maintain vitality and continue to evolve as the actualization that I am." Please give a very, very warm welcome to the great Francois Jullien.
So I'm going to be speaking French with translation. That is what Europe is about. I call the silent transformation a transformation which takes place without a noise and which we do not talk about, total silence. It happens without a noise and we don't talk about it. Why don't we talk about it? Because it is global and continuous. Global and continuous, so there is never sufficient marking for it to take place. But why silent? Why do we not talk about invisible instead? We need to go back to the Greek choice of view, what is seen, visual perception, and when the eye no longer sees it, it is art that sees it. That means the Greek talk about Aristotle's metaphysics. The first choice of view through senses is about intelligence, but view is a local sense, and it is discontinuous. You look over here or you look over there. I open my eyes or I close them. So we talk about local and discontinuous, but we talk on the contrary about global and continuous. Why do I talk about silent transformation and not invisible? So global transformation and continuous transformation, because you need to talk about a sound event. More the transformation takes place discreetly, more we talk about it, more it appears in a sound way. So there are examples of this. Growing up, you cannot see your own children grow up because it is global and continuous. It happens continuously, and then one day we notice that my son is now the same height as me. This is a sound event. Getting old is a silent transformation. We cannot see ourselves getting old because everything within us gets old. Voice, view, and everything else, and we cannot therefore distinguish this. So when we see a photograph which was taken 20 years ago, you can say, oh, I have got old. So this is a sound event. This is a silent transformation. I'm thinking about Maupassant here, who's a novelist who's written this. We're talking about a man in a train and see a lady who comes into the carriage with her. looks at her over the newspaper, and the woman says to him, "Aren't you Mr. Thing?" And he says, "Yes, I know her. I knew she was young, she was fresh looking, she was in that particular condition." And when he looks in the mirror, he then sees that it is himself as well. It is a sound form event, a silent transformation. But there is only silent transformation. Everything is a silent transformation. It's global, it is continuous. We cannot see things happening, but we can see the result of this sound event. Ice melting, and so on and so forth. So the falling out of love is a silent transformation. We talk about divorce, which is the end, but what we don't think about is what happens upstream. It is discreet, it happens silently, and we did not see this. There are nuances, silence, there is reticence, something which progressively takes place, without noise, and we don't talk about it. One day we actually reach the final event, the end game. So this discrete silent transformation is very significant. We talk about the breach, which becomes wider, becomes a ditch. And this is an event which produces this final, violent, brief sound event which surprises us. So, if I talk about falling out of love, about divorce, this is because we have chosen in Europe to talk about this in terms of breach. You and me, that is the sound breach. But we're talking about what happens beforehand, discreetly led to this breach. So I am a philosopher, I follow the Greeks, but I have also decided to look at China because that is somewhere else which enables me to step back from European thought and then at the same time to consider things from this external view about our European thought. So this transformation, I would like to talk about Greek difficulties first of all, to consider silent transformation, or rather what is transition. We've got the same word in English and French, transition, but the Greeks didn't know how to think about transition. This is at the heart of transformation itself, because the determination, they think about ends. And between the two events, which is neither one thing nor the other, so there is no being which exists at that point there. So the idea escapes from this. So Plato spoke about melting snow. Yes, snow. We know what snow is. It's white, crystalline, cold. And then water, we know. But melting snow, Plato didn't know how to think about this, and it's about movement. Either I am immobile or I am mobile. Either we are talking about mobility or we're talking about mobility, but the idea of the transition is not to think about this. And we talk about an event out of time. We talk about this thing which is situated there. We could say that is just Plato, Aristotle thinks elsewhere, but no, in fact, Aristotle is the same thing. It's about Greek thought. Aristotle doesn't think about grey. It's either black or white, but grey, we need to determine what that is. Grey is between the two. It is neither white nor black, and we have to think about the median in music, the transition. So what the Greeks didn't realize, and what we need thought. Let's think about this in terms of languages, for example. See how an idea gives us some choices. So we can think about some choices, but this choice can be put to one side, but another thought makes other choices, and enables us to think about what was resisting our original thoughts. So the difference is a very difficult word in English. We talk about gap, but in fact écart in French is different. It's in my idea, I think about what is separate, the separation between one thing and the other. So what characterizes this Greek choice, thinking about difficult Greek thought, about transition, what the Greeks think about being, the determination of of this. So the big idea behind Greek thought is more something isn't, more it is. If you look about Hegel, you think about this is the European philosophy. You think about painting, it's the same thing. More it is determined, more it is in absolute terms. So what happens in silence, what is missing is what is not, what is in transition, what transforms. This what happens through this determination. So Greeks and the subsequent philosophies such as ours thought that transition is distinguishing what is indistinct. So having clear thoughts, what is clear here, if you can see that there are choices of clarity and you need to make choices about this. So if you look at Chinese thought, because I think across both of these, in China that helps us to think about transition. Firstly, you talk about determination, there is no chronology in the same way. So in China, in Japan, they are connected to the seasons. And what is this? This is a transformation in time. It is a continuous transition which can be divided up into seasons, 4 seasons, but which it is in fact something which continues without end. It is something which continues without being specified. So in China, there are 2 concepts which refer to transition. In fact, we only have 1 term, but these 2 ideas are modification and continuation. And confirmation is both a modification and at the same time it is a continuation. These are both concepts. So this is the seasons, for example. There are 4 seasons, 2 seasons which change, and 2 seasons which continue. So winter to spring is a change, spring to summer is a continuation, then to autumn is a change, and then a continuation into winter. In Chinese terms, we talk about change being inherited, but transformation is an alteration, rather a change and a continuation, but the change is an alteration in order for continuation to continue. So this alteration within the continuation enables renewal. So here's an example. The change when you write, a transition when you write. When a paragraph, if you finish it, you then move on to the next one. So what happens there? What is a literary transition other than moving on to the next line? It is nothing but a change to continue the text and to continue by leaving it behind. So we say when you write, it's like being on a boat, like when you're rowing a boat, when you lift the oars, but the boat continues to move. There is a literary transition, is the same thing. The text continues to move forward in the gap which is left between the 2 paragraphs. I've quoted Plato talking about melting snow, and that is because I have the image of Tao in French thought, in other words, snow, which is melting. Because this snow, while it is melting, it is indistinct, it is unclear, it is neither water nor snow, it has no essence. And this is the very image through which it characterizes Tao. So when the snow is on the point of melting, the voice which moves towards applause, it is the voice of the route to viability, the route that we move through constantly in order to continue on our way. So Tao thought is unclear, it is indistinct, and it is the very image of melting snow. This brings us to think again, to question again the European thought in its assumptions. So think about it in as much as we don't think about it anymore, because it is clear, it is self-evident. What we no longer think about questioning, we no longer think about questioning. So Aristotle would talk about change here. Our experience of change, Aristotle would say, we analyze it in terms of movement. We talk about it in terms of metabolic change, but we analyze it, we consider it in terms of movement. But what in fact happens? What is the difference between change and movement? Movement always has a start point and an end point. You know, Aristotle says it moves from point A to point B, from Paris to London, starting point, ending point. But there is change here. Does the change have a starting point or not? In our experience, when did I start to get old? I don't know. There is no starting point to this. We could say birth, but no, in fact, it's before birth. Biologists tell us that even before we are born, the embryo is already moving towards death. We have a hand which does not yet have a shape, and it is death which sculpts the fingers and moves us towards death. So, from which point? I don't know. It's the same for death itself. We consider human life as being a journey. That's the image in Europe, from birth to death, which is the end point. We talk about the curtain going up and coming down. That's in dramatic terms. We talk about it in pathetic terms, in pathos. But the idea of death is an end. It is a curtain which is torn down and something else happens behind. But in Chinese thought, you need to be aware of education before birth, the education of the embryo. Mother listens to music in order to start to ensure that their child starts to listen to the music and starts to learn straight away. And the major transformation which takes place here continues. This is a moment which is significant. It is a significant moment because this enables the qi, enables breathing to continue, and this person becomes an individual, and at death they diffuse and roll out into this form of energy which continues to exist. So this is the point at which we start to realize that everything is a transformation. It is remarkable that the Chinese do not talk about a start and an end, but they talk about the end and the beginning. Often translators correct this. They say, no, you need to put these things the right way around. No, it's not a beginning. It is the beginning of the end. No. In fact, it is the end followed by the beginning. Everything which comes to an end is a beginning. We talk about Genesis and Apocalypse here, but everything is a transition, as a major author from this said, once the world dies every day and is born every day. It's a major transition. So this interrupts our thought in terms of being, our determination, self-determination, leaving the unclear, vague ideas in between to one side. In particular, when we talk about the subject, I am a subject, or where does the idea of the subject come from? For the Greeks, it began with Aristotle. What is a subject? We talk about upokamonon in Greek, the underpinning. Underpinning what? Underpinning change. This is the beginning of Aristotle's philosophy. He talks about the opposite, hot and cold, Genesis, Deus, and I'm a subject, but by putting this underpinning into the change, which does not change, in fact, this basis, which underpins the change, but does not change it, as Aristotle said. So, this question is important. Could I consider this to be a subject not changing just for the sake of change? If I think about moving from black hair to grey hair, if I don't think about these as underpinned subjects, who which change predicate, they change attribute. So our life is a sort of value. We talk about change, black, white, old, young, but we can maintain this subject as a basis which underpins everything. So this is the question which Proust wondered at the end of his work, the afternoon, when after she leaves Paris, Paris returns to the world, looks around, and I saw this young man, and now I can see that you are an old monk with a tonsured haircut. Is it the same young man who I saw beforehand? Is this underpinning change that does not in fact change, and where we would only change the predicate? This is a classic concept in Europe. Time is a change. Without touching it, the essence changes. But this is a question which we need to consider again, because we have thought about the ontology of the subject, of the being, but with the difficulty that philosophy does not face this, literature addresses this rather. That is what the authors think on this particular subject. So, talking of aging, is aging simply changing predicate, changing reality, leaving a subject intact, underpinning it, in other words, addressing the question of identity, and classic European thought does not do this, because this upsets their concept of being too much. Now talk about consequences of this transfer, this interruption to European thought in the silent transformation, which is solidly anchored in the underlying basis of the subject itself. So, I will talk about transformation and action. We have Greek thought, which is marked by thought of action, how things have a beginning and an end. So, opening the curtain, closing the curtain, raising the curtain, lowering the curtain. So, what we can do is break down my life, the procedure of my action, into events in different languages, but action is a sort of breaking down with segments of my conduct with have a beginning and an end. So the question was identified by the Greeks. If I break this down into actions, my conduct down into actions, I then wonder where the starting point of this action is and the cause, because Greeks talk about cause and principle. And that leads me to break down successive segments to wonder how I break down my action in Greek philosophy. Is it against my will or by following my will? And we talk about the idea of choice, progressive choices. But if you move to Chinese thought, they do not have a term for action. They think that conduct is something continuous. It continues like that. So there is no longer you no longer isolate this into segments with a beginning and an end, so the question no longer exists about doing it by my own free will, and it's no longer a question of my own liberty. We do not do this yet in our own Congress. So, if we talk about the underpinning of this subject, Chinese thought thinks in terms of continuous transformation. Successive actions are stages which we cannot individualize. We consider the cause at the very beginning. If I talk about actions which are modeled, actions modeled the revolution, does a revolution exist? Is it not the representation with a sound event or a silent transformation? Let's talk about the French Revolution as we refer to it. It has a beginning and an end. Do we talk about it in terms of actions? We say 10 years from 1789 to 99, but that's roughly, in fact, it started beforehand. When? I can go back in history, and what we talk about, when we talk about the French Revolution, we're covering 3 centuries. The bourgeoisie taking political power, having obtained economic riches during the previous 3 centuries. So that's the beginning and that's the end point. So we break it down into segments like this, the Ancien Régime, and then the Consulat, the Empire, and so on. But we're talking, in fact, a continuous silent transformation. If we can go back as far as the financial and economic crisis. I can go back even further to Louis XIV, who travelled to Versailles and he reacted to an event. So, in fact, is this transformation something which we break down into actions dramatically with different subjects, perhaps in heroic terms, but also in slightly mythological terms. So that covers one thing which is remarkable. When we see that Chinese thought covers this, we wonder then, Chinese thought does not have a concept of time. This is a concept which we find difficult. If we talk about time, this is something which in our mind vacillates, and it is something which we determine. So we need to understand why Chinese thought cannot produce this concept, this basis, which we really find it difficult to understand. But at the same time, the philosophers continually say that when I'm talking, I understand what that is. But why do we think about time? Why do we therefore cut down into different actions for a subject? But it's because we conjugate. We have tenses, present, future, past. Language, in fact, breaks things down into time, because language is determined by thought, but tenses determine language. But Chinese doesn't do this because it always uses the infinitive. So you do not have this logical breakdown which segments actions on a specific subject. The infinitive leaves the subject without referring to time and to tenses. It continues. The transition continues. So the Greeks, we talk about chronos, time, and chronos who eats children at the same time. This is 2 philosophies. This is something strange in Greek, that chronos can be 2 different terms, which is a confusion over time between the god who eats children and time which continues and confirms and consumes. As Baudelaire said, time eats life. So why is at the end of the Chinese thought about duration, moment and duration. Moment is seasons and duration. They do not have time, this envelope, this abstract envelope, but things which are those things which determine European thought. So that leads us to question things which are more mythological and which lead us to think, in fact, of events. Events are not just a particular event in a particular moment. It is something which is silent and which continues, but an event in the Latin, the sound event which occurs during a transformation, a silent transformation. So event, clearly this is a breach, it is a rupture, and this populates the event itself. So I wonder, in fact, whether this is a mythology. It is something which is compact and solid, because this event, this temporal assembly, is unclear. It calls on the imagination. But when we turn on our TV in the evening, we have events which take place every day. There are the television news bulletins. Is what they tell us real? Is it not real? Is it not a theatrical representation of continuity of history, which when they show us an event, and on many days there are no events, in fact. No, obviously there is clearly an event of some sort. They create an event for us, but over history, terms of diplomacy, internal and external politics, it continues, but the actions which we show of these events are a montage, an assembly, which meets our expectations of events, which the desire to focus on this eruption over time. So, why was China so little receptive to Christianity? Because Christianity is about events, before and after the birth of Christ, and events that then cut through time. It is based on thought of event. Christianity didn't enter into China. It is now starting to, but there are reasons in China. There are natural reasons for thinking that a message of an event and of salvation found it difficult to enter into China because of silent transformation as considered and understood in Europe. So, media, as we know, live from events. The transformation of events is more of a media event and rather than an effective event. And I think we should ask about this sort of pathos of the event organized by our contemporary culture. So, like a marathon, you see, it's continuous, it lasts for hours. We have opportunities to renew the continuation. Do we talk about a bolt of lightning in English? In a bad novel, yes. In good novels, no. In tacky novels, we talk about a bolt of lightning. That's in that sort of novel. But in good novels, let's talk about Anna Karenina, for instance. Tolstoy, what in fact are novels? Novels are machines of silent transformation. So, how do we move continuously from war to peace? It's a global and continuous event. Anna Karenina, how do we move from love to suicide? It's a silent transformation. You need 1,000 pages to follow Tolstoy's silent transformation on a global and continuous basis, which leads to the moment when somebody throws themselves under a train. So, the novel begins with a meeting between Anna and the Count. And in the first chapter, we see Anna, this young woman from St. Petersburg who's got everything. Everything is successful. She's got a husband, a charming young son. But you can see her internal emptiness. We can see her skeleton, her internal skeleton. That is in order for her to meet the Count. Because we meet people every day, but what means that... What do we call this bolt of lightning which underpins this situation? This slow maturation which leads to the event as a sound event. So this bolt of lightning is in fact nothing other than this silent transformation continues. But we talk about this bolt of lightning because we don't have the imagination. So my question now is to understand the silent transformation, this notion. So I will develop this in terms of Chinese thought as a concept, the concept of qi. We think about history, politics, strategy, and so on. Firstly, we learnt history, I imagine in England and in France, in the same way as France, at school, as a series of events. We learnt dates. The kings go onto the throne, they die, there are wars. And then we see that, in fact, history is not that. These events are only the film over the top of history. If I talk about France, historians see that, in fact, history is what we call a long time but a slow duration. We talk about invisible, the virtual immobility of history. The virtual immobility of history, because history goes very slowly. We have these staccato events, but in fact it's a slow change, because globally, because it continues. But if we talk about Brodel in France, because it's something that created Europe, because at the end of it is about the development of capitalism. What is the status of this event? I would say that it is in fact a silent transformation, because it is global, and because it is continuous, and because there are no dates for the arrival of capitalism in Europe. There is no major subject, there are no names, there are no places, there are no proper names, but there is a continuous change on a global basis, which, for those who've lived it, experienced it at the end of the 18th century in England, capitalism happened. So I think this is a useful concept for history, to talk about in more clear terms what we talk about, the slow duration, the events, this staccato events which take place on specific dates in history. So political concepts, we could imagine a silent transformation as politics. This is an anecdote from a contemporary Chinese text from the time of Aristotle. And we talk about a peasant who returns home in the evening and says to his children, "I worked a lot today. I pulled up the bulbs in my field." And when the children went to the field, they saw that everything was dead. So it's tiring, and it has little effect, because you're going to you're going to force things to grow, but the counter effect is going to be produced. So it's tiring and it doesn't produce anything. So are we often not doing the same thing? So not to pull up bulbs, not to try and get things to happen more quickly. We should leave it and allow things to develop. We could say the opposite. I said, rather than helping things to grow, we should just watch them grow. We should do neither the one thing nor the other. What should we actually do? From time to time, we should encourage growth from time to time, circle around. It's not heroic, it's not, but we consider that politics should be the same thing. We should look around the situation from time to time, what we call the potential situation. If I'm using French terms here, the previous president in France helped things to go. The current one is waiting for things to grow. So neither of them is encouraging things to grow or supporting the process, because the process continues without being announced, without talking about unemployment going down in 3 months, 3 years, 3 centuries. We can talk about silent transformation as a policy of encouraging. It's like a first movement at the beginning. So encouraging. I don't know what the word in English for the French word amorcer would be. It's a concrete term, it's a practical term, encouraging. In other words, progressively encouraging things which will subsequently appear. So starting them on their journey. So discreetly beginning to create the beginnings, the basis for this, so that we can see why the Chinese talk about they have a spring festival why don't they have a winter festival? Because in fact celebrating spring when it hasn't yet started, it's happened. Celebrating spring when it's spring, it's in fact when the sap starts to come up from the roots. That is the very beginning. It's obviously a dotted line. It's not yet visible, but that is the very beginning. So when something starts slowly and infinitely moving towards the infinite, that is in Chinese thought, from intimate to infinite, We cannot see this as it happens, as it develops. So this is I was talking about an interesting history in China. Deng Xiaoping was the silent transformer in China. When he started in France, in China is in one state, but when he died, he had turned it into a capitalist place. So the event happened, but it is us, in fact, who are talking about events, because in Chinese they don't talk about events. This is delicate affairs and events. But Deng Xiaoping, we called him, we taught him the small leader, not the great leader, because that was Mao, in European terms at least. But Deng Xiaoping, his leading phrase was, in order to cross a river, you need to move from stone to stone. Wherever the river goes, from stone to stone. You have no projects, no projections over history, but there you go, continuity, continuous movement forwards. So, effectively, Deng Xiaoping is the silent transformer of China. He truly changed Chinese society from socialism to capitalism today. Their increase in power, but without events, without display, but in a very effective manner. So, historical concepts, prehistorical concepts, political concepts. So China tells us, in terms of silent transformation, we talk about transforming as the verb strategy. We talk about uniting following by disuniting. How do we continue this? We talk about a transformation, a silent transformation, which means that things progressively lose their potential, and you only undertake actions when you have already won. So when there is no longer any potential there, you begin the action at that point, but there it's already too late, it's already dead. So thinking of this continuation to change, as happens in nature, globally and continuously modifying the situation to achieve its end. To the extent this... So then we talk about continuity, we talk about bad, we talk about real as a continuity, but when it no longer happens, when it stops, when it gets stuck, that is bad. That's psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is pain, it's bad. We talk about Freud, it gets stuck. We talk about trauma. So we have analytical cure which looks at this transformation, and that is a global continuous way to continue to release the trauma and to continue to renew. So we can move on like that for a very long time to then question the capacity of silent transformation, because we cannot see this, because we do not distinguish this, and more we cannot distinguish it, more it arises before us as a sound event, because we can see this rooting when we see the progress at that time. So everything, so talking in terms of European and Chinese thought, because these are two philosophies. I'm not talking about Chinese thought, we're not talking about somebody who invented it. Nothing is worse than converting to another thought. No. I think that in our world, globalization, we talk about travel. So consider cultures as diverse as different resources, where each culture, in other words, language and thought, each language, each thought in the choices that they have taken gives us opportunities and also provides other opportunities. Every culture, an opening onto what is possible, and by traveling between the cultures we can bring together different possible configurations. So today we can travel between languages, between thoughts, and we can see different resources, and we can walk to draw the benefits of the different resources that we encounter, so we can enlighten our experience using this diversity, these different thoughts. So the subject to come, I do not see it in terms of a new truth, which would appear, which would then concern us, but I consider it as an agile subject, a moving subject, a mobile subject, which does not move into the impossible, but by discovering others, moves between the different opportunities for thought without getting stuck in a specific configuration of thought. So we talk about an agile subject, an alert subject, as opposed to inert, because by immobilizing a thought, but it is relaxed, it is comfortable moving between different thoughts, it is agile, it is alert, in order to maintain thought and put its thought back into question. Thank you very much.